Welcome to Potentiality. This podcast has entered a new chapter. It has evolved from a solo voice into a shared space of wisdom. I'm now inviting experts from diverse fields emotional intelligence, mental health, education, leadership, technology, and beyond to join me in honest, meaningful conversations. Together, we explore the inner worlds and relationships of today's young people and what truly supports them as they navigate an increasingly complex and fast changing world. While empathic and sensitive youth remain close to my heart, these conversations reflect a broader truth. Most teens today are carrying levels of emotional pressure once experienced only by a few. This space is here to offer insight, validation, and grounded guidance for young people, parents, and educators walking this path together. With that being said, I want to introduce today's guest, Dr. Deanna Vehuni, a transformational life coach and mindfulness teacher whose work bridges psychology, neuroscience, and spiritual insight. She helps people reconnect with their inner truth and build emotional resilience from the inside out. Welcome, Deanna.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation and share something valuable for our audience.
Thank you so much for being here. You offer a number of incredible services and courses. And one of the courses that you offer is around self-love, which you offer for free. And that tells me that you really recognize the importance of self-love. And in my own self-discovery journey over the past decade, at some point, I have come to realize that one of the foundational elements I was missing to build a life of authentic fulfillment and happiness was that healthy, true self-love. But growing up, I had no concept of it. And I see the same thing with many of my clients. They either don't have the concept of self-love, or they lack it, or they have distorted self-love. To frame our conversation, I want to start with a definition. How do you define self-love? What does healthy, true self-love really mean?
Mhm. Thank you. That's a great question to start with. And yeah, you're right. I'm really passionate about talking about self-love because that was the most transformational shift in my life. And the reason I'm sharing my course for free because I believe every change we want to make in the world starts with self-love. And that's why the course is about love yourself first, change your life, and change the world. So the simplest way I can define self-love is being kind to ourselves, which might sound very simple, and yet there is a reason why we can do such a simple thing. I believe there are other components to self-love. One of them is seeing our worth that does not depend on our circumstances, our past, or even the way other people perceive us. Our worth is a given. It is our birthright, so nothing can change that. And also the courage to see ourselves honestly, because self-love sometimes is being confused with selfishness, right? Some people think if they're loving themselves, it means they're gonna be more selfish, and that's not the case. There is definitely a difference, a very important difference and we can go into that as well. But having the courage to see ourselves truly, so we can
Mhm.
see our weaknesses and we can see our strengths, so we can continue learning and evolving, seeing the truth, seeing the clear picture, and not being distorted by the past experiences. So yeah, but the goal is to have that kindness for ourselves that we can often easily give to other people. But we're the ones who deserve our love first.
Mhm. And that's where it truly starts. So yes, you already touched upon something that I wanted to discuss, that really the fine line between self-love and selfishness, but we will come back to it. Before we go there, I really want to make this very clear to our audience what this self-love really is. We gave the definition, but what would be the characteristics of a person who has that true healthy self-love? So what are some signs to know that the self-love is present or it's absent?
Yeah, it's a great question because I love focusing on what we want, like what we ideally want to experience rather than what's wrong, right? Which is also helpful. But to have a better understanding what it means to be somebody who has that healthy self-love for themselves. But first of all, as I said, seeing their worth, right? And on a more practical level, it would be having that compassion for themselves, right? So we are, imperfect human beings, so we mess up, we learn, and the question would be, where does our mind go? Does it go into criticizing ourselves, judging ourselves, into shame and blame, or does it go into self-compassion first? It's like, yeah, this was hard, acknowledging our feelings. Maybe I'm scared, maybe I'm angry, but either way, I am worthy. It doesn't change my worth, right? Even if I messed up, it doesn't change who I am as a human, as a worthy human. Another um, quality of a person who has that self-love would be um, being able to set healthy boundaries with other
Mm.
people. This is about not being codependent, not being a people pleaser, or at least being aware when we do that. That's another important part of that, which as a recovering people pleaser, I can talk for hours about how important it is to have those healthy boundaries with other people as well and with ourselves. So those are some of the qualities. I think definitely it brings more peace and more wholeness, which the podcast is about wholeness, and it's so important to. I think even though we generally don't think in those terms, but ultimately what we want is we want to feel whole, which means
Mhm.
we want to heal. We want to heal those wounded parts of ourselves, and self-love allows us to do that more easily. And I think maybe that's the only way we can do it if we have that self-love for ourselves. If we don't, we are not gonna do what it takes to heal some deep wounds. So I hope that's helpful.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. And I find really self-love is developed or lack thereof, in the relational dynamics. And this is what I see over and over. I know that definitely has been true for me. And I see this with the people that I work with. Oftentimes, those patterns are inherited from very loving and well-intending people who just didn't know any different. And sometimes I find just really the journey starts with that looking at the reflection in the mirror, and starting the work there before we can offer, and lend the kind of offer the help and lend the hand to somebody else. And with that, I really wanted to ask you because we don't come to do the work that we do by accident. I strongly believe that. So, what part of your personal journey or lived experience led you into the work you do now around self-love, self-worth, and inner healing?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And just like you said, it often starts, well, it always starts in our childhood, sometimes before we were even born. But with people or loving parents, with loving families, they don't know any better, right? And sometimes what they're trying to do um, in the in their belief, in the best interest of their children, ends up really hurting them in ways that they can't even see. So for me, I grew up in a family of loving people for sure, and yet there are some things that happened even before I was born, during my birth, and afterwards. It was not anybody's fault, and yet those things happened, which affected me that I was not even aware for many years. So I was diagnosed with um, general anxiety when I was very little. And I started having depressions early in my teens. Later on, I had panic attacks that completely made me um, incapable of doing some simple things. I couldn't even drive myself to work, and it was extremely difficult to manage my life. And I didn't know why I was so messed up. Really, I was always thinking that something was wrong with me. Like I grew up with that belief something must be terribly wrong with me, and from whatever I was perceiving, it course, it's not happening on a conscious level when you're 2 years old or 3 years old. But my unconscious conclusion was that something's wrong with me and I am not worthy and I don't matter. Right. That basically became the lens through which I was seeing myself and my life for decades to come, and which naturally led to very difficult life, to the point that it was becoming unbearable. And I came to the point that I had to change something, or else I wasn't going to survive. And that's when I started looking for answers. Um, and of course, self-love was one of the key um, shifts that I made, which took me years before I even figured out how to apply it to myself because I was learning it from other people. I was reading it in books and hearing other teachers say, you need to love yourself. You need to love yourself. And it's like, that sounds great, but yes, everybody should love themselves, but not me. I don't deserve it. Something is so broken in me that it's not possible, right? I'm that one exception in the world. Of course, I know many people feel the same way, but it's because I had to. Like, it wasn't a matter of wanting to change something. I had to. It was a matter of survival. I found a way little by little, and I realized that it made the biggest change in my life when I started treating myself as a worthy person, started being kinder to myself. And I truly believe that there is nothing that harshness or self-judgment can do that kindness or love cannot do better, in a more sustainable way. And that became my practice, how to turn. And this is what I help my clients with, because there are many of my clients, probably all of them, want to get rid of that inner critical voice, right? Inner critic, which is usually an internalized voice of one of our caregivers, or some kind of an authority figure from early life. And they try to get rid of that voice because sometimes it's destroying our life. But I realized that that's not really the goal. It might not even be possible. What I found out to be a better alternative is to turn that voice of an inner critic into the voice of an inner mentor, because I believe that voice actually wants to help us, but the strategy is using is often actually hurting us. So that became my practice, how instead of having that critical, judgmental, inner parent or whatever, having an inner mentor who's loving, who's compassionate, who really cares about us. And that worked. So I've been practicing for years, and it's a completely different experience. So if anybody is trying to change that in their head, maybe you can try, because it really does work. So everything that happened in my childhood led me to learning everything I've learned to help myself first. And when I saw how well it was working, I started to talk to other people about it, just because I was passionate about it. And then people come back to me and say, like, oh, what you shared the other day helped me see my relationships differently, and I made these changes. I'm like, oh, I wasn't even trying, I was just sharing something. And I realized how much value is in that. And because I always wanted to help people, that was my biggest desire, but I couldn't do anything about it because I was barely surviving most of my life. And then I realized there's something I can actually do for other people, and that led me to becoming the transformational life coach and educator that I am today.
Thank you so much for sharing the early context. It's very personal, and I know sometimes it's not easy to do so, but that's really what shapes us. And as a result of it, we become, just the default kind of a creation of it, or we consciously choose who we want to become by intentionally working on it. It's really fascinating what you've shared. That there are a couple of things that I want to focus on. Number one, there's no blame, right? You said it's nobody's fault. And I really want our audience to clearly hear this, because reflecting as a parent, sometimes I see some patterns in my own children, and I always feel like, oh, I should have done something different. I wasn't a good enough parent, right? And so we really want to make this very clear. We do the best. with the knowledge, with the level of expertise and understanding at our own programming as parents. And so that's really important to remember. There is no blame, but it really starts with awareness. Like if we see certain patterns and we want them to be different, then what does the work, behind it that needs to happen in order for things to shift? There's
Absolutely.
another thing that you mentioned that is super powerful, and I think our audience will take away with them is inner critic, turn it into your inner mentor. And what you've done is really powerful, but it takes training, right? Because mental training, oftentimes our youth doesn't know what their mental patterns are. And that's some of the work that I do. So I would like you to go into this in just a second. But before I do that, I want to reiterate once again the power of the work you've done, coming, from the early context that you're coming from. Just like Tony Robbins, I was listening to his interview, his early context and what he was able to create and the service to offer to the world. And I see a lot of parallels in that sense on different scales and different niches. So with that being said, let's talk briefly about mental patterns, because how do you really turn your inner critic, which a lot of us who come from very difficult early childhood experiences, how do you really turn it into your inner mentor? Is it a mental shift? Is it an emotional shift? Is it an energetic shift? What needs to happen for that to actually work now to your favor?
Yeah, that's a great question. But if I can, I wanted to say a word about blaming because I think it has a lot to do with actually shifting our inner critic into an inner mentor. Because I went through a long phase in my life blaming, not certainly I think we're wired to blame our parents, right? And I went through a phase when I'm blaming, like, oh, if those people could only see me, if they could help me, and when I needed help and all of that. So I went through that phase, and the only thing that was created is more anger, more sense of victimization and all of that, right? So I went on and did that because I didn't know any better. So if anybody is in that phase, my invitation is to see that pattern and see that actually growing up, and this is really important for teenagers and young adults, that growing up means to take responsibility for who they're choosing to become. It's no longer about the past, right? The past is what it is. The only way the past is present in our life now is how we choose it to be present, right? The only way we are still struggling with our past is because the way we see it, and we can turn that into a different story, right? And we have the power to do that. And because that voice in our inner critic, it's really, as I said earlier, it's a voice of of our parents usually, or somebody from our early life. And it's like having that conversation with the inner critic. It's like having a conversation with that person that is not in our life sometimes even, or maybe still are, but um, it's just continuing to have that conversation, and it's just not healthy, and it's not helpful, and it's really taking away so much of our energy and time and our potential and it's wasted. So if we can turn that conversation into a productive conversation, just like with a mentor, or we can still choose to see it as a loving parent, or a loving friend, right? Whatever is more feels right to each person. But seeing the patterns, I think any change begins with awareness. And I think to help teenagers or younger adults to have that awareness is probably number one skill they want to develop, right? To be able to observe their own themselves having an emotion, having a thought, and realizing that they're not their thoughts, they're not their patterns, they're not even their behaviors. This is something they chose, whether consciously or unconsciously, and they can do something about it, right? And usually that's where I recommend some kind of a mindfulness approaches, that allows us to become curious of our experiences rather than judging them and trying to avoid them or trying to hold on to them. But developing that neutral mind, that doesn't mean that we're going to do it all the time, but what it helps us to do, developing that muscle in a way, whether meditation or some kind of mindfulness practice, allows us to do that throughout the day. It's just like a muscle we develop, and then we can use it whenever we need it. We become generally more aware, so we catch ourselves more quickly whenever we're doing something that's not helpful, whether it's the thought pattern, whether it's the emotions, whether it's again behavior or relationship patterns. It all begins with awareness, number one, and then of course having the skills, because once we're aware, that's another phase we go through, right? We're aware of like, oh, I'm doing this again, and then I don't know what else to do, right? So we want to know what to do instead. So also learning those tools. And I loved how we started our conversation with how we want it to be, like what does a self-loving person look like, right? What is different? So we want to have that positive um, image or the positive model of how we want it to be, how we want to behave, how we want to think, how we want to feel. Like what is that we're actually you know desiring, like what is we're trying to do, not what we're trying not to do, but what is our actual positive goal that we're moving toward, and which will naturally take care of the negative things we don't want anymore. So yeah, awareness number one, and then developing specific skills to do it in a way that is going to actually serve us.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. Absolutely. Both are critical. So let's get very practical before I go to the next question. I feel like this conversation could last for hours. There's so many things I want to ask. But let's say I am that young person who has gained that awareness all of a sudden, and oftentimes we're pushed, by pain rather than, just kind of pulled by insight. And so let's say I am, that young person who is not really feeling good about, themselves, who is not surrounded by, authentic relationships. We don't feel like we belong. We're just meeting all the expectations and the demands of the external world, being a good student, a good daughter, a good son, or a good friend. But we internally are struggling in the sense that this is really not, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. And so, which really usually generates that awareness that something is missing, something is off. And so, how do I, as a young person, really start this journey? What
Mm-hmm.
question do I need to ask? What type of people do I need to look for? What kind of tools, strategies, skills do I really need, to acquire in order for me to start kind of unraveling, this path and start walking it more authentically? Because I feel like a lot of young people that I work with, on the external, everything looks fine. Good grades, sports, music, everything, but they struggle internally. So, which really is a sign that they need to look deeper and maybe what they've built as a life that shows normal or typical or even good externally is not in resonance for who they truly are. And from that, I really want to then walk into a conversation about self-trust, inner guidance, because all of this is related. There's lots of noise in the modern world that is really fast, and it's accelerating. And to discern what's truly mine, what's not, becomes really challenging for youth who hasn't really developed their core.
Yeah.
And so with that, I want to ask you, what is the role of self-love in all of this? If you could elaborate on that and just give a very practical advice, like I am that young person who feels this inner conflict, although externally my life looks really good.
Yeah.
How do I go about this?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it makes me think of a quote by Sri Krishnamurti, who said, "It's not a measure of health to be well adjusted to a sick society." It just made me think of that. And you're right. Not only are the society we live in, it's like life is just accelerating the speed of everything that's happening and changing, but it's unhealthy in many ways. And I really feel for the young generation because they're entering this life, which is already a confusing time in their life. Right now, they're trying to figure out so many things. Maybe in a way they are more prepared, but maybe in a way they are finding it even more challenging than we did when we were at that age. So self-love will be again really important because as I said, self-love is about being kind to ourselves. That's number one. It makes things a lot easier than when we are, really hard on ourselves. So unfortunately, a lot of people believe that unless they're hard on themselves, they're not going to make progress, and that's not true. While being angry at ourselves, being really frustrated can give us that boost of energy and courage to make big changes sometimes, and it's true, and sometimes that works. It's not a sustainable way to make continuous progress, right? Like if you have to, hate yourself all the time to make progress, like what kind of a life is it going to be, right? And then as soon as we don't hate ourselves, then we lose our motivation. So I believe in positive motivation. Now, I think the negative motivation, we can always rely on it because there's always going to be something negative, like some fear or something motivating us to do things. But if that's what's driving us, it's not sustainable, and it's going to make us continuously miserable. So self-love is the way. So we want to make those changes because we love ourselves, because we see our worth, and because we know we are capable. I think a lot of times younger people don't have the confidence that they can do it, right? Because they don't receive it from other people. They were not maybe encouraged to do certain things, right? Whatever the case is, but they don't have the confidence because they don't have the life experience, right? They didn't overcome enough challenges to develop that confidence, and that's where it's coming from. But I think having that self-love and self-trust already gives us, even without that, having that external confidence, gives us that a good foundation to have the courage to at least go and try things. At least we're going to know at the end of the day, if we messed up, we're going to have a friend on our side, and it's us, right? Wherever we go, whatever we do, we're going to have somebody on our side. So being our own friend, again, it could be a mentor, it could be a loving parent, we're never going to feel alone, and we're going to feel supported, right, in those situations where we need it the most. I discovered that when I felt there are times in my life when I felt like the whole world was against me. No, that wasn't the truth, but when you are in your wounded part, when you are in your trauma, that's sometimes how you feel. And I realized that if I have myself, because the worst thing we can do in those moments is turning against ourselves. That's the absolute worst thing to do. So my invitation to my clients is that if you are in that situation, instead of going against yourself, go toward yourself even more. The more you feel hurt, the more you feel, any negative emotion, give yourself even more love. It's I call it fierce self-love, right? Love doesn't always mean to be, or even being kind to ourselves doesn't always mean, just take a nap or go to a meditation class or take a bath or whatever, right? Sometimes, yes, definitely we want to do that and take care of ourselves, but a lot of times it is that fierce love. No, get up and do that, make that call, take that action, speak up, and do things that are good for you, even though it's scary, right? So to somebody who is in that situation, I would say believe in yourself, trust that you are capable. And that's what I would have said to the younger version of me who was struggling. I would have said, you're different for a reason. It's not because something is wrong with you. It's because you're meant to do something that other people can't do. So trust that inner guidance and listen and learn to listen, to yourself in a way that will help you bring that whatever you're meant to bring into this world, and whatever you're going through is not an accident. It's nobody's fault. It is maybe, even if you believe that higher power, it may be designed for you to become the adult you need to be, or young adult and adult you need to be, to make a change in the world, to make that difference or help people who are going through that, right? I'm one of those people. Like everything I've learned allows me to help other people. So, and that's and I think it's true, number one. And the second thing is, like, you see your struggles differently. So instead of become a victim, you become somebody who learns from them. It's like, oh, okay, what? And as you mentioned, Tony Robbins, and he says, life is happening for you, not to you. If we can change that and truly live that, not just say that, right? Life is happening for me. To become the person that's going to make a difference in the world, to become that, healthy, fulfilled, successful, truly successful person. And again, self-love, self-awareness, and in that moment, saying to ourselves, you are worthy. I'm here. You're not alone. We can do this. Like literally talking to yourself, because we're talking to that scared part of ourselves. It's a whole different thing we can go into, like the wounded child, and how important all of that is. And I believe what you're doing is so crucial, because this kind of education should be in schools, right? Not as soon as possible, right? As soon as possible, we need to teach children this basic emotional intelligence. And I think it's not only going to change their lives, but it's going to change the world, because it all begins with trauma. And yeah, I hope I gave enough, practical advice. Yeah, definitely self-love, talking to yourself as somebody who's worthy, turning on that inner mentor and so like, yeah, speak to me kindly. Yeah, I know you want me to succeed, but to tell me in a loving voice, what you want me to do. And I think they'll find their way much more quickly.
Mhm. Thank you so much. And I think what you're also kind of alluding to is that core belief. You mentioned something, you're different for a reason, right? And that is your gift. And learning how to cultivate it, how to capitalize on it, how to develop it is really where the power lies. And so that unwavering belief in oneself, no matter how it feels right now and what it looks like, is just knowing that every moment is a learning experience. And through reflective practices, which is, right, another practical tool, is just learning to be reflective and just learning from the experience and knowing, how to grow from there. I know I struggled, for a number of years, just like many of us, just like you've shared. And it has come to the point of realization that life doesn't happen to me, which is that victimhood mindset, that life happens for me. And at some point, you realize life happens through me. You become the vessel who can help and offer the support to others who are going through a similar journey. I want us to now really go back real quick and just address that fine balance between authentic, true, healthy self-love and
Mhm.
all the distorted versions of it that oftentimes I also see with our youth, right? And it can look like selfishness, it can look like many other things. So please talk about this, and how do you see this? How do you work with this? How do you really how do they distinguish from another, and how do they direct themselves in the right way?
Mm, yeah, it's a great question. I know, of course, teens and young adults, they're all different. I don't have a lot of experience with them. I have, young adults, yes. Um, but I can refer to my own experience growing up. It's well, first of all, probably the main distinction for me, which is the easiest to observe between healthy self-love and selfishness, is healthy self-love helps us connect with people more. Selfishness actually disconnects us from people. So that is, like, if we don't know any other difference, that's one thing we can probably easily see. Like, okay, is it helping me to get closer to with other people? Do I want to be more connected, have more deeper connections? Or on the contrary, like I don't like people maybe avoiding me altogether. So self love is, and some people actually would say that we can't truly love somebody else unless we love ourselves. Now, some may agree, some may not. I believe that, at least if it's not 100% true, but it's, maybe 99% true at least, because even if there are a lot of parents who don't love themselves, but they say, like, of course I love my children. Yes, I mean, it will be very unhealthy not to love your children, but there are different ways to love your children, and there are different ways to express that love for their children, right? A lot of people think they were not loved by their parents, and it's not because they were not loved, but because they were not shown the love that was there. And so their experience was, I'm not loved, something's wrong with me, right? Of course, and we conclude that, no, of course my parent cannot be wrong, right? We depend on them for life, right? So that's why we can't ever question our parents. So we question ourselves, our worth, and that's really where it comes from. our us questioning our worth, our not feeling good enough, and all begins there because we are questioning ourselves and not our parents. So self-love is the difference is that we, well, first of all, we often, especially somebody who didn't have healthy love for themselves, and we start practicing self-love, it's very easy to go to the other extreme, right? When we're learning to set boundaries, we can overdo it, right? We can overdo everything we're learning because we don't know the balance. And I can imagine with younger adults, it's even harder, right? Because again, they don't have enough experience. They're still trying to figure out a lot of things. And it might be even more confusing to like, okay, what is self-love versus selfishness? And that's why they need more support from parents, the parents that actually have done some work. They have the awareness, and the educators who have that awareness and they can differentiate. I think that's where their role is so crucial to help the teens, especially sensitive and empathic teens who, sensitive about everything, right? Everything is more intense for them, the good and the bad. So they do need more support. And that's where we can help them to navigate through that because again, self-love, as we described, the qualities of self-love versus selfishness, which it might feel good in a moment, right? It might feel like you set the boundaries and you're doing these things, but does it feel good after the first few moments, right? Does it still feel good, right? That's how another way to know, like, was it coming from the right place? Is it coming from that loving place to set that boundary, to speak up or do certain things, or is it coming from anger, or is it coming from that wounded part? It's like, oh, you did this to me, I'm going to do this to you, right? That's not self-love, right? So we want to speak up, we want to express our emotions, but it's very important to know how. So that's another thing we can help children and young adults to be more skilled at, how to communicate our emotions and our boundaries in a self and respectful way. Not only for them to be more, well received, but also to help our relationships to have better relationships. And that's such a big part of, everybody's life. And of course, again, in that age, at that age, it's even harder because we're still trying to figure out who we are, how to have relationships. So that's another piece because self-love leads to healthier relationships. And if you're setting a boundary, it's from love for ourselves and the other person. It's not me or versus you, right? It's always us versus the situation, whether, it's a couple or friendship or whatever. So I would say those are the main things that allow us to differentiate, healthy self-love and how does it feel? How does it feel after we did whatever we thought was self-love? Does it still feel right the next day or a week later? Or was it just in that moment? And then you're like, oh, that doesn't feel good. And then also, does it help us to connect with people more? And how does it affect our life in general, right? I think we see from the consequences, right? Being more observant. Like, is this helping me? Is my life getting better? Am I feeling happier? If I'm doing better at school, right? So all these things, is my relationship with my parents maybe better because of it? So there are so many ways we can kind of gauge and see, like, is this really actually good for me? Is it actually healthy long term, not just short term?
I'm so thankful that you've addressed that because it is multifaceted, really. And knowing the role of self-love in the relational dynamics, especially at this formative age, because this is adolescence and even young adulthood. This is the time of individuation and identity formation. And a lot of, young people struggle with that. And that becomes me versus you, right? They deny authority. And so that's very present at this time in their life. And really, it's, I think, understanding on both parties that self-love, true genuine self-love really helps that relational dynamics. It heals it, it strengthens the bond, rather than, creating more conflict if it's done properly. Well, selfishness can create more conflict, but genuine self-love actually strengthens the bond, the relational bond, whether it's the parents or, other people present, in the lives of the youth. So many important things that we can discuss further. You mentioned the empathic youth, Diana, and I can't not ask you this question because both of us probably kind of recognize ourselves as being more sensitive, and we feel everything deeply, the good and the bad, as you said. So how is the experience of learning self-love, if it is at all, any different from more sensitive, for more sensitive people who just experience life at a completely different level of depth? Now, maybe it is even more important for this group of people, and maybe the experience of cultivating is different. So, just briefly, I would like you to unpack what does self-love mean for empathic, sensitive people and youth in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. It is because, again, they experience everything more intensely, and they need self-love because just just like with anything else, they everything is more intense. If they're hating themselves, they're really hating themselves, right? So it's everything is on a different level. I think it's more important in many ways, probably because they're suffering more in general, sensitive people. Sometimes I feel like with sensitive people, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, because we know that some people are genetically more sensitive, but sometimes it's because they had some trauma early on. So sometimes it's even hard to tell which happened first. They're sensitive, that's why they were more traumatized, and that's made them even more sensitive, or which came first. But either way, they definitely need more support. They need to feel safe. They need to, whatever everybody needs, they need more in a way. But at the same time, I would say that for sensitive people and empathic people, it's in a way also easier to connect with their feelings because they are already connected. And that's partially why they're struggling so much, because they're very connected to their feelings, while it may not be the case with some other people, that some people are not as connected with their feelings, and which is often also the result of trauma. They disconnect from their feelings in order to survive, right? And even adults, sometimes when you ask them to what they feel, they have no idea what you're talking about. So, but that all starts early in life, even they're teenagers. So I would say it's that definitely they need more support, but at the same time, in some ways, it's easier maybe for them. Um, Again, in some ways, because they are already connected, maybe because they have more awareness, and maybe because they can already see and feel things that might be difficult for people who are not as sensitive. So yes, but for anybody who is either a sensitive person, identifies with it, or parents or educators who are working with sensitive youth, I would again invite you to be aware like how important it is for them. And I think our sensitivity is our superpower, but can also be our biggest weakness if we don't know what to do with it, right? So I think that's really something important to remember. Like, because somebody's sensitive is not that because something's wrong with them. No, they have a gift, and that gift can be cultivated, but it's like I would the analogy I would use for myself, it's like being um I don't know, like a delicate flower versus being, a weed or something, that will grow anywhere, right? So yeah, we appreciate delicate, beautiful flowers, but they need more care. They need more uh, nurturing, right? And I think that's the same thing. But they are beautiful. They have, they have really beautiful gifts to share often. And yeah, I hope those young adults will receive the support they need and deserve. I really feel for them because I know what it's like not to have that.
Well, that was so well said. Thank you so much. So If you could name one internal shift that could most profoundly change a young person's relationship with themselves, what you would want them to understand and embody from a young age. Thinking back to your own experience and all those thousands of clients that you work with, what's that internal shift that we hope our audience will take, just kind of walk away with that needs to happen in order for them to develop this healthy relationships with themselves and start embodying it from a young age?
Mm. I would say it always comes down to you deserve to be kind to yourself. You deserve kindness, you deserve love, right? It's like if we accept that, and I think it's because it's our birthright. Like, how can we question that, right? Nothing and no one can take it away from us, and it's a given. And once we accept that, everything else kind of comes out of that, right? If you know you deserve your love, a lot of times we wait for somebody else to love us to feel worthy of love. No, it begins with us. Actually, when we give ourselves that love, other people, our external life will reflect that back, and we'll receive more love because we chose to give it to ourselves. So we're radiating that energy, and people respond to that. So know that you deserve to to receive your own love and be kind to yourself, right? I think that's where everything begins. That's one shift that probably not only made all the difference in my life, but I'm also practicing it daily, like all the time, because I have that voice in my head too. And before I ask it to be the inner mentor, sometimes it might say a few mean things, right? So yeah, I'm going to self-compassion first before I learn whatever I need to learn from an experience.
Mhm. Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for normalizing it. That's part of human experience, right? We all have that voice in our heads, to some extent, and just knowing how to work with it. That's really, at the end of the day, it's a skill, but it starts with that belief that I'm worthy of it, right? And you start giving that love to yourself first, and then the world starts kind of reciprocating it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Deanna. Now, this podcast is called Potentiality. Well, the Wholeness Education is my company, but the podcast is called Potentiality. And as a systems thinker who sees the interconnections of the micro and the macro, I want to ask you this question. We already talked extensively about the impact of genuine, healthy self-love on an individual, on a relational dynamics. And I wonder what is the potentiality of making a positive impact on the larger humanity if every person is taught self-love from a young age. You said that this should be taught in school, as young as possible. So thinking of the humanities trajectory, as visionaries, like what do you think is the potentiality of the future that we can collectively create if all our children are taught that genuine self-love and learn to embody at a very young age?
I love imagining that. I remember when I was very little, I was imagining what the perfect world will look like. That's the way I was entertaining myself. Um, but it's again, I love how we starting with what is possible, right? I almost like one of the things I practice every day, being open to possibilities, no matter as Alice in Wonderland would say, right? Think of 6 impossible things every morning before breakfast. So I think we can all practice that. And I would say, well, first of all, self-love will help us heal all the trauma that we see not only in our lives, in our families, but in the world. So I think in a generation or two, we will see a peaceful, a kinder world. And I absolutely believe it is possible. I do believe that deep down we are good people, right? I personally don't believe that there is necessarily evil, like just a force on its own. I believe it's the lack of awareness, lack of skills, it's trauma that can turn into evil that we can observe so easily. I think at least we experience a lot more of that than anything else when it comes to the negative. But there is not only the again individual trauma, but also collective trauma we see, right? But individual healing will lead to collective healing, which will lead to collective and big changes on on the scale of our societies and the world, and maybe one day beyond that. I do believe it needs to start in school at least, if not earlier. And I think this is why parents need to do their work. So they start with children from day one. Um, but again, self-love, again, it's about healthy self-love, because sometimes we might think like loving your children will mean, teaching them self-love is going to be about, saying how they're the best, they're great, they're awesome all the time. That's not healthy either, right? It can lead to grandiosity, and that happens. It's the another extreme from shame, right? And it's just not as unhealthy. So self-love is about being able to see yourself clearly and honestly, right? Helping them feel safe enough that they can see themselves. So the parent has to do the same thing. Help them to see the good and the bad, and how they're doing a great job and how they need to do some work, right? So I think it starts, ideally will start at home, right, with the parents, and the school will continue that, but at least if it hasn't been done already, the school will do that as soon as possible. Again, in a healthy way, and it's going to look different in school than it's at home, of course. But I absolutely believe it is possible, and I really hope that more people. And I know people are becoming aware how important it is, and I see things are changing. I hope they change a little quicker because we're running out of time in a way. But yeah, thank you for using your potential and to fulfilling your potential by contributing to that change with your skills and your experience. And I know how passionate you are about it, and so am I. Maybe we're addressing it slightly different perspectives, but absolutely the goal is the same. So yeah, I wish us all luck because we need it. We need it to
We
do
need
that.
all the forces. Yes, we definitely share the dream. And like you said, I strongly believe if we really work with parents, educators, and youth, ultimately, within a couple of generations, we can change the trajectory of the collective. And that's why I'm fully dedicated to that. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for sharing your lived experience, all the challenges that have shaped you, the gem that you are today, both personally and professionally, and for the work that you do in this world. And I'm very curious, what is alive for you right now? What's present for you? What excites you? What gets you up in the morning, either personally or professionally?
Mm. What excites me is possibilities, right? It's infinite possibilities. And what keeps me going is gratitude, because I think it's the magic uh, switch from any
Mm,
negative emotion, fear, depression, um, hopelessness, right? And then you focus on something you're grateful for and sincerely feel that gratitude. And then suddenly your body and your system, your nervous system, your brain operates in a different way, right? You begin to see the world differently. And that opens up possibilities where you before you saw walls, where you saw hopelessness. And that's what I'm passionate about and excited about, and using my creativity and my natural gifts to contribute to what I can do for other people to whatever scale, to become again more self-loving and bring that love into the world. I think we can all together create a ripple effect that will make a kind of shift in the world that we can all feel. And I believe it's possible. And that's what gets me up in the morning.
mhm. Yeah, I believe in that too.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So, Deanna, where can people find you if they're interested to learn more about your work?
Yeah. Probably the best place would be my website, dianavehuni.com, on my social media. But if you go on my website, you can find my free course, and you can find my videos, and I have a ton of free content and YouTube channel. So it's easy to find me, but probably the best place to start would be my website.
Thank you so much for sharing it. And I want to let the audience know that everything that Deanna just shared will be in the description box below this video. So you can find those links there. Deanna, once again, thank you so much for sharing your life's journey, your wisdom, your professional expertise, your beliefs, and your hopes, your dreams as well. We definitely share many of those. And thank you for doing the work that you do. It is very timely and incredibly important. So thank you. And thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak to people who might find it helpful. I hope you either check out my website or simply take away something from this conversation. And I believe in maybe whether it is something you were ready for to receive fully, or maybe just accept that little seed that maybe one day will give you what you need the most. But most importantly, what I always say at the end of my sessions, like, remember to be your authentic self and have fun.
Mhm.
Again.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Hope you found this dialogue relevant and insightful. This is first in the conversation series on the Potentiality podcast, and I will see you next time.